supposed to take the makers off the table, but it's too late now. Might as well take a sip.
I did not see that coming.
Oh my
God.
God.
It's the lore. It's the mystique of it all.
We're still doing it. We haven't been cut off yet.
Oh, shit. Good job, buddy. Nice job, Daniel. Good job. Keep that rod bent. Keep that rod bent.
I mean, people used to get so scared of them, they had to shoot them.
Yeah, that's true.
But because you literally can't stop thinking about it. You know, you can't scratch the itch enough.
Hey, listeners. Just a quick heads up. This episode includes a deep visual dive that's best enjoyed on our YouTube channel. While the audio is still engaging, for the full experience, we recommend heading over to Musky Fool Fly Fishing on YouTube. Now let's get into it. How's it going, everybody out there? Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Burn Podcast. As always, you got your host here with Josh and
Dan from Musky Fool. What's up, everyone?
How you doing out there in the interwebs land? This episode is number 31. Oh boy, time flies when you're having fun. And we are officially middle-aged adults now. That's so hot, Hansel. That's so hot.
Those neither of the ones I wanted. I don't know where they are. I just go and press one. But yeah, we're talking about adult topics in our middle-aged. We are having our midlife crisis on the podcast.
We sure are. Yeah, today, folks, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're doing a deep analytical dive into the state of fishing licenses in Wisconsin. Why do we care about this so much? Well, if you've been with us recently, you know that the DNR in Wisconsin is facing a massive budget shortfall, and as such is making massive cuts to our fisheries. We're trying to understand the full scope of this current situation, and in order to do so, we need to start at the top: fishing licenses and fishing licenses sales. So that's what we're going to kind of dive into today and the analytics behind all of that.
Love it.
But before we get carried away with that stuff too much, we just have a couple current events that are a bit heavy, but we do want to acknowledge them. First up is the Popovics Hit Run.
This is crazy
situation that occurred recently in late September. Bob was he was leaving a fly tying meeting, and unfortunately,
he was walking
across the street, and he was struck by a vehicle in an alleged hit and run accident. He sustained pretty severe injuries from that. As of this recording, he's still in critical condition, and he's on the recovery track. So that's good at least.
Thoughts and prayers with Bob and his whole crew and family. He's a legend. That's a bummer. That's terrible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Renowned author, super influential fly tyer in the saltwater community.
Bucktail, the first big dude to put bucktail on the map in terms of tying material.
Yep.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Thoughts and prayers there, folks. We'll keep you informed as we know more as well. Second one is we're mourning the loss of the great author John Geirach. So, yeah, he passed away on October 3rd at the young age of 78 years old. He's the OG Trout Bum.
Mm-hmm.
He's got over 20 books that he's penned in his career. He's got writings that have appeared in Gray's Sporting Journal, Field and Stream, New York Times, just to name a few.
Yeah, I mean, even just the reaction to that news on the social medias, he touches a lot of people in fly fishing, inspired a lot of people, gave, I think a voice. He kind of captured it.
Yep.
Why we do it way deeper than just fishing, catching fish.
Yeah. If you've read anything about fly fishing in the last several decades, chances are he penned some of that. So
yeah. He caught his first muskie on the fly at the Bob White muskie event several years back.
Yeah, him and Bob are good friends too.
I think Luke was guiding him in that. That was where he had that awesome muskie moments of sheer terror. He caught a muskie and just like immediately penned this like great quote. Which we'll probably have to go dig up because I definitely won't remember it word for word. I'll butcher it, but it was a good one. If you've heard it, you know what I mean.
Along the lines of hours of boredom followed by seconds of pandemonium,
punctuated by moments of sheer terror, I think was how he. Yeah.
That's a good one.
But he said it in his own way. So
all right.
Yeah, our thoughts and prayers are heading to John and his family. That's a big loss to a lot of people, fly fishing community. He was huge.
Yep. All right, folks. Up next, I'm going to hand the reins over to Daniel Donovan for the meat and potatoes of this episode here. So, Dan, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I think where we wanted to start was we wanted to come back. This is going to be an ongoing situation with the Wisconsin DNR and really our fish and wildlife management in Wisconsin. We have a bunch of updates from the last episode. So if you've been with us, some of this might sound redundant or obvious, but once we posted the video about the budget deficit on Instagram and YouTube, there was quite a reaction, which was good. That's what we were going for. Our goal with posting something like this is pretty simple, to raise awareness about a message that we think is important to our fisheries and wildlife in the state. The reaction was big on both sides. Mm-hmm. A lot of positives, a lot of negative. It got political, which isn't necessarily terrible. It's not a bad thing. This is a political issue in some senses. But we had quite a lot of people reach out offering support, some even from the DNR offering encouragement, some also from the DNR not offering encouragement, like ad hominem attacks on Facebook for those that are into that type of thing. But all of that's really, to me, good, and it's good because if nobody engaged at this, we would be in trouble.
Exactly.
And the fact that there's passionate engagement on both sides means this is important. This matters to a lot of people. So we're, and I think after some of that, it may have got heated. There was moments where Jen and I even had convos about like, whoa, it's easy to say you're going to talk about this stuff and push on it. But once you start doing it and you have a business and a livelihood that we all depend on, things can get interesting. But I think it was pretty quickly, ultimately we decided there's not really a choice. Trying to understand the facts and sharing what we find out is what we are really going to do. I don't think should be controversial. It may get controversial, but I think that's what this is about to us. I think in order to fix some of these, we need to have common ground. We need to have shared understanding. Of course, we're going to all have personal biases and cognitive biases and personal beliefs. And for instance, like me as a business, you guys know that I own Musky Fool. Josh works at Musky Fool. We love this. We depend on it. So of course we have biases, but we should be able to put them on the table and know that we're incentivized to not make fishing worse. Not if the fishing industry was booming in Wisconsin, we would be incentivized to celebrate that. So I think that should be worth noting. We're really trying to find out the truth and share it here. What's at stake? How can we make Wisconsin one of the best natural resources and fishing experiences in the world? How can we see that happen? This also, I think, isn't about Wisconsin, as we've talked about. It's so much bigger than Wisconsin because there's 49 other states. There's Canada. There's a lot of this. The fish don't know the state boundaries. Mm-hmm. But I think there's examples. We're going to dig in here. This is where you and I are born and raised. This is where Musky Fool is founded, operates. This is where we fish and live. This is what we know the best. This is our local water. So if we're going to speak up and dig in, we have to be the biggest proponents of this. That doesn't mean we don't want to talk about what's going on in other states. There's a lot going on, positive and negative, that we can learn from, that we can share learnings that have worked up here, things that haven't worked. So I think that's some of the hope with that as we move forward. Ultimately, we're just gonna, I think try to get as many people engaged on this topic as possible, and that is going to happen because we're going to break this down a little bit. So that's kind of how we got to this point. I know that's a little long-winded. Few more updates that we talked about on the last episode. So we mentioned the Musky team and the potential cuts facing the Musky team. And this is a specific team of all sorts of different folks at the DNR dedicated to muskies. And this does happen for, I think most species have, there's an elk team and a walleye team. I think ultimately it's probably still inevitable that some of this team gets cut, at least resources that they're able to deal with, since the DNR is leveling cuts really across the board. Mm-hmm. However, they did fill the position for the new co-lead of the Musky team that was previously held by Jordan and now is held by Dan Ole. So I think that's quite exciting. They were pretty quick on filling that, getting Dan in there. I know Dan. He was our fisheries biologist here in Dane County. He helped us with a lot of muskie projects on the Madison chain. I think this is overall a great win. It's definitely a muskie guy who fishes for muskies. He's a smart dude. So I think, welcome to the Musky team, Dan, and we're happy to have you. Madison Muskies. This is another thing we've talked about quite a bit. Got some quick updates on this one that are related to the overall stocking efforts going on throughout the state. really quickly, Madison Chapter Muskies Inc. raised $40,000 in this year to fund our fishery since the DNR has not consistently been able to stock them over the last 5 years. We knew the DNR was planning to stock, so we knew that they had allotted budget to stock about 2,700 fish, but up until the point that they actually do that, we had to basically have a backup plan, is what we've learned over the last 5 years. Right now, as it sits, we're recording this on October 11th. They're scheduled to stock. The DNR is scheduled to stock the Madison chain, believe it or not, Josh, October 24th. 2,700 Great Lakes muskies. For the first time ever from the Wild Rose Hatchery, Great Lakes muskies will be put in to the Madison chain.
Dude, very exciting.
Fat lady's not singing yet. Yeah. I don't even know if you're allowed to say that anymore, but whoever the lady or man is, he ain't singing yet.
Yeah, we'll find out about 2 weeks here.
But I think ideal situation. I think this is an example of being proactive and working with the cards that you have, because if the DNR doesn't come through, we have the funds and a backup plan to stock the Madison fishery this year. Mm-hmm. If they do come through, we have the funds to protect that into the future. Make sure we can stock next year and the year after that, because obviously the DNR has been being cut. Or it allows us to do other interesting things, research things. You never know. So that's a win. Muskies so far, October 24th, if you want to get involved and be part of that stocking, I believe anybody can show up. Because it's the DNR stocking, they should be stocking all 3 lakes, Madison Chain, Wabisa, Wingra, and Monona. More info about that's on the Cap Cities Muskies Inc. page. We also talked about, I think we were left with this, here's the problem, the DNR deficit. What's being done? Who's organizing around this to address some of this? And I think some of that's really popped up quickly. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to just briefly touch on that, and that is the Wisconsin Wildlife Coalition. So this is a large group of, I think, about 40 folks at this point, of DNR members, conservation groups, other nonprofits, private sector, really focused on tackling the budget deficit and how we can fund our fish and wildlife account. Spearheaded by a gentleman at the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, I think the executive director over there named Cody. He was at the shop last week. Awesome dude. Musky Fool was asked to join as part of the private sector representation. So that's really exciting. Both that this is already organizing and that we'll be able to provide updates in real time about what's going on and what we all need to do as anglers and participants in the outdoors of Wisconsin.
Excellent.
So more to come.
3 very exciting updates.
I would
from
say
my
so.
Last episode.
I would say so. We needed a positive swing there a little bit. So good to hear.
For sure.
Things are happening. Actions being had.
Yep.
All right. So now let's dig into what we're really here to talk about. I think as we dig in, just to set the stage a little bit, as we dig into fish and wildlife management in Wisconsin, there's so many huge topics, and a lot of them are all related to each other. We started by just addressing the main problem on a couple episodes ago, just this massive shortfall in funding. I think that's the canary in the coal mine. It's breaking. So there's going to be a lot of things that we dig into to understand how it all works, educate ourselves, from stocking, natural reproduction, how the DNR is organized, other types of game fish management, muskie management, DNR licenses, DNR law enforcement. There's so many things that, and I think we're going to, use this as a chance to break that down over time based on what we feel is kind of the most pressing at the moment, or, we might meet somebody who's an expert in a certain area. I think we're definitely encouraging you guys all to help with this, stitching this together and finding the right people to talk to. But we're going to break it down. I think that's the point there. Hopefully that helps us all kind of learn. You guys are going to be learning as Josh and I are learning. This is like our little research homework assignment, and you're coming along with us. So if you can help point us in the right direction, by all means, we will take that kindly. So we're going to start with one of the most important topics today: how the DNR gets funded and the current trend of fishing in Wisconsin. That's kind of setting the stage for. In order to have the conversation about everything else, I feel like we need to have this ground truth about where are we at right now, where have we come from. It's also like what we're going to talk about today is fishing licenses mainly, and that is really, as it stands today, the main direct and indirect source of funding for the DNR. They get dollars from the purchase of those actual licenses, and then those licenses play a role in determining how much federal funding we get from things like the Pittman-Roberts Act and the other excise tax act that I cannot remember at this moment. So we're going to geek out over some basic stats, some graphs. We got a little PowerPoint
PowerPoint.
We're going to go through this. So we did a little analysis, Wisconsin fishing licenses. We wanted to start with angling in the United States. We got to set the context of like, where is Wisconsin in the greater scheme of things? What are the national trends? So this is really simple. This is all pulled from the ASA fishing report. They publish a special report every year on angling. It's actually really interesting. We'll post the link. It's a really long report, covers all sorts of stuff, more than we could cover here today. But the point's pretty straightforward. Steady growth, angling in the United States. About 54 million people in the United States participate in fishing. That's about 18% of the population. When we look over the last 5 and 10 years, and this is going to be a conversation about Wisconsin today, so we compared it a little bit to Wisconsin. You can just see the growth of angling over time, last 5 years, last 10 years. Pretty consistent nationally, which is really exciting to see. Fishing is on the increase. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some challenges with this. One of the topics that we could dig into at another episode is this leaky bucket phenomenon, which is that fishing is growing. But one of the things that makes it hard is that for all the new anglers that we get, most of them leave the sport. It's a lot of churn. So there's a lot of new anglers every year. I think it's close to like 15 million, but close to like 13 million stop fishing every year. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. You've probably heard most of them, you know, the generational changes, lots of different things. But really, at the end of the day, fishing is still increasing. And it's both increasing as the population increases and increasing in the percentage of the population that fishes. So overall, good. Wisconsin, not necessarily the case. We're going to dig into that. But you can see over those same periods what the growth in fishing license sales looks like in Wisconsin. And then I think the other thing to call out here is if you zoom in on 2020, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's this guy right here. That's COVID. So COVID, as we all experienced, was a huge swing for fishing and outdoor recreation. And pretty much any metric that you look at, there was more people fishing, more dollars spent in fishing in COVID than really any time ever before in history. Mm-hmm. And the question was always, what would happen after that? And in the United States, honestly, it looks like it was a boom. There was a huge increase, but it's held overall. There's a little bit of a drop-off the year following, but we've actually almost rebounded nationally to the same amount of anglers in 2022, as of this report, that there were in 2020. So COVID brought some new people in, and they stuck around, is kind of how I interpret that very loosely at a high level.
Silver lining, folks.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Josh? Like the stage of angling in the United States, any surprises with that?
Not a lot of surprises, but it sounds like we got a retention problem on our hands.
We do.
Wisconsin.
We do. So let's get into that. What are the states that make up this number of angling in the United States? And this is information I would have been able to fill in a couple of these, but if you would have told me to guess the top 10 states for fishing based on number of anglers, this list was very surprising. What was not surprising to me was Florida, Texas, California, Wisconsin, or Florida, Texas, California, New York. 4 biggest states by population. Of course, they're going to have the most amount of anglers. It seems logical. What was very surprising was in that top 7, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. Way less. There's less people in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota than all of Texas combined. Yeehaw! And we have as many anglers individually as most of them. Wisconsin has more anglers than New York. Almost as many anglers as California. And I think it's crazy. I mean, angling, when you look at Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, there's not many lists where we nationally are above New York and neck with California. You know?
Yeah, like
they usually kick our ass in most things because they're big states with huge economies.
Yeah.
When it comes to fishing, that's not the case. Angling's pretty core to the Midwest. And my favorite stat of this whole thing is 7 of the top 10. So no Florida, Texas, or California, but 7 of those top 10 are native musky states.
There's
I like it.
Correlation brewing here, folks.
But yeah, just take a look at that. Based on the amount, like this just screams, this is how important angling is in these states, in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. I think, as we're going to talk about on the next slide, you know, what could make that up? So this has got a lot of data. We're going to publish all of this stuff. We're going to try and keep this engaging on the podcast, and kind of just ship this stuff to all of you guys in a Google Drive with all the data, all the reports we have, and you guys can read through a lot of this. But the point here is just to do a little bit now of a deep dive on what's the state of the state with angling in Wisconsin. So one, how's the Wisconsin Fish and Wildlife account funded? There's a lot of different models for doing this throughout the United States. Ours is a license fee model. We pay a fishing license to the Wisconsin DNR. That money is used to fund fish and wildlife and also drives some of the federal grants. There's 1.2 million licenses sold in the last year in Wisconsin. That is not necessarily 1.2 million anglers. Think of things like all the different stamps, and you might buy an annual fishing license and a sturgeon license, and those are kind of counted together. Mm-hmm. So when we take some of that out, we get to about 1 million anglers, give or take. There's a couple different sources on this, but we'll just say for the sake of argument, there's about 1 million. When you look at the number of licenses, that's down from last year. So we sold less licenses in the 2023-2024 year than previous. Anglers, you can read it there, but the majority of them are resident anglers. So these are, unlike other tourist heavy states where there's a much higher percentage of non-resident anglers that effectively parachute in. Those have its positive and negatives to that, right? They bring a lot of economic value, but they're also not the stewards of those fisheries over time.
Yep.
So that's interesting. And then participation rate, I tried to look here at the number of resident licenses divided by the population. Sometimes those other numbers, like you saw on the previous screen, when you just take the number of anglers divided by the population, it's good for this chart because it's consistent across the 10 states. But if you really want to see how many of the Wisconsin population is fishing, I would say more accurately is roughly about 13%. And then as we stated on the last slide, this fishing is we rank 6th nationally in fishing in terms of angler participation compared to 20th by population, 23rd by land area, and 4th by total water area. So you wonder, it's not a big leap of faith. You got all this data on the left side about where Wisconsin is from a water perspective. It's probably why it's such a great fishing state. This is core, this natural resource is something core to Wisconsin, unique to Wisconsin, sacred in Wisconsin, and we have to kind of treat it that way.
Yeah, take that, Minnesota. We're the land of 15,000 lakes.
I do believe Minnesota is 5th on this list that Wisconsin is 4th in.
Yeah.
But they have more anglers than us, so they're making more use of their water than we are.
They are.
All right. So we're talking about fishing licenses, and we wanted to at least, again, provide some context on what that structure looks like in Wisconsin. So we laid out a few of the most popular fishing licenses. Again, we're going to publish all of this information that we have directly from the DNR, every single license, all the way back to roughly 1999. But for the sake of this, we called out the most popular, the ones that contribute the most amount of money. And the reason we're talking about all of this right now, I think, is because immediately after this conversation with the DNR funding, our heads go to, oh my God, license fees haven't changed in 20 years. We need to raise them. And I think commonsensically that sounds obvious. So it was like the immediate reaction. We need to raise license fees. That's going to fix this. That's going to fund the DNR. And I think part of this analysis was to make sure we understand what's going on before we jump to solutions. That's, I think, a pretty typical reaction that we can have. And the law of unintended consequences usually rears its head in fisheries management rather quickly. So this is where we're at. I think over time, you see, yes, it's obvious we have barely raised fishing licenses over time, especially resident annual anglers are getting a sweetheart deal. 10 years ago, same price. 20 years ago, nearly the same price. Adjusted for inflation, this is like one of the cheapest fishing licenses on the planet. Mm-hmm. Non-residents have paid a little bit. We've raised those a few times. I think it's worth noting that resident anglers have the majority amount of anglers. There's almost 75% resident anglers of that population, as we saw on the last slide. But they contribute about 50% total revenue. So those non-resident anglers are getting dinged more. They are paying more to fish in Wisconsin. We're not making a statement one way or the other on that. It's just the facts. They also, non-residents are going to be majority of the short-term license sales, 15-day, 4-day, 1-day. Again, that logically makes sense. They're going to come here for a weekend vacation. They don't need an annual license fee. This is also where the concept of price elasticity of demand. What the hell is that? Why does that matter? What are we talking about? And that literally is the economic term. We're going to come back to it in another slide, but that is the economic term for when you change the price of a good. What is the impact of that price change on the quantity demanded? I.e., if we are to change, lower, or raise license fees, what will the impact be on the number of licenses we sell? And that's a supply demand. We're going to look into that a little bit because that's really, we got to understand that. I know it seems complex. It's not really that complex. It's just a bunch of fancy words for how much does the price change impact how much we buy. So we're going to come back to that because that matters. And then I think I've said it a couple times, but right now, this is how our whole fish and wildlife world is funded, is these licenses drive direct revenue. These licenses drive indirect revenue via other federal grants. So it's important. Thoughts on fishing licenses, Joshua?
Makes sense to me.
We're getting a good deal, hey? In resident annual first-time buyer, $5 to fish all year long. Doesn't include stamps, obviously, and stuff like that, but whew.
That's a small barrier to entry.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Okay, let's look at licenses sold over time. This is, excuse me, burping mid-presentation. Licenses sold over time. So this is the exact same data presented in a line chart and a bar graph because some people prefer one or the other. We didn't want to exclude and divide up the line chart and bar graph community. We just want to bring them together. So this is an effort to do that.
I'm more of a line graph guy myself.
I won't hold that against you. All right. So what you have, blue line, is resident or total licenses, resident licenses in orange, non-resident licenses in gray. Again, all of this data will be published in the Google Drive link in the show notes. I think this is like underpins the argument of, is fishing growing in Wisconsin? Is fishing decreasing in Wisconsin? Are more people fishing? Are less people fishing? That's not only important as a gauge of engagement, like user engagement. Are people engaged in this resource? It's clearly one of the most important things for our state. We're number 6 in fishing. Are we still number 6? Are we dropping? Are we growing? And then it's clearly the driver for how much our fish and wildlife account. So this is a good and a bad thing in some ways, is that the number of anglers drives the amount of money funded into fish and wildlife. It's hard to tell when you look at both of these graphs, actually. When you just look at them, there's not really an obvious trend. The graph actually looks pretty flat. One thing that jumps off the page is there's not a ton of change. But small percentages can be big dollar amounts. This can be a big swing. And clearly you can see some of those big swings when you look at that big spike in both of the graphs, which is COVID. That's the increase in license sales. When you chart this information out, we're gonna go into a little bit deeper statistical analysis, nothing crazy. But when you do chart this out, you do see some weird things. One, for sure, growth. There is growth from 2006 to 2015. Pretty undeniable looking at that chart. Pretty steady increase. You also see an absolutely undeniable, I do not see how anyone could look at this and see otherwise because it's a fact, a fast decline from 2015 to now. Kind of hit that peak in 2015 and then down we go. Of course, I obviously see the COVID spike. But I think what's interesting about COVID in Wisconsin, if we compare this back to the national chart, is there was not a COVID recovery. Mm-hmm. We're back to pre-COVID levels and actually continuing that downward trend, as opposed to bumping back. So that's pretty clear. And this is the kind of a fact that paints the picture of where we're at today in 2023. There are less licenses sold in 2023 for fishing in Wisconsin than there were in any year in the 2000s. So that means every year from 2000 to 2010, there were more people buying fishing licenses than there are right now. That should concern us. That's a problem. I think it's especially a problem when we get to, we'll get to this a little bit later, especially a problem when the license fee effectively has gotten cheaper over time. So there's not many things that when it gets cheaper, people want less of it. Those are probably correlated, not cause and effect, just to be clear. So let's dig into this. We showed this chart, which is 1999 to 2023. Now we're going to split that apart. This is 1999 to 2021 because the data was a little bit different on participation rate. So typically when you're analyzing something like this, I prefer to analyze the rate instead of the raw number. So instead of how many anglers in Wisconsin, it was the participation rate of anglers in Wisconsin, how many angler resident licenses divided by the Wisconsin population. Very almost identical line to the number of anglers. And you can see as I tried to apply a line to this, or a trend line to this, you can see that equation there in light blue. The thing I want to point out about this is that when you look at that and you're like, oh yeah, there's a trend line, it looks like some smart analysis. All that really matters is that R2 value that says 0.02, because that just tells you that this trend line actually is not a trend line. It's the best we could do, but that's really far away from matching the data. Typically that means like you got to do something else, a different type of trend. This is a linear, you can look at logarithmic. But what we decided to do is just break these apart. So you have this 15 years of growth. When you break that apart from 1999 to 2015, really clear trend line. You can see that R value, 0.82. So that's saying that trend line fits the data really accurately. Increase, undeniable increase. And then 2015 until now. Now, COVID is kind of fucking this up. But again, undeniable decrease. Not as strong of an R value. Mainly because of the COVID issue, but you can see this is hard to look at that even without the trend line as an increasing number. It's undeniably decreasing. The number of anglers in Wisconsin from 2015 until now is decreasing rapidly. Okay, so let's come back now. I'll pause there because we're going to get into that old price elasticity of demand. Where's your reaction at so far, Josh, on some of this? You've seen it a little bit, but I think this is like the first fresh time running through some of this.
Yeah, it's crazy to see that if we didn't have COVID, we'd be even in a way worse spot. COVID just brought us back to the baseline of the early 2000s. Truly,
it was like the defibrillators.
Yeah,
just like shocked us, gave us a little adrenaline shot.
Yep,
a little cocaine for the fishing system.
It really did, didn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we've been pretty realistic about that as a fishing industry. During COVID, everybody thought this was going to last forever, and it did come crashing down. I was actually more surprised that nationally we've recovered. I would have assumed that nobody recovered, but that might just be because it's been a Wisconsin situation. Okay, so we talked about this earlier, price elasticity of demand. How much does a price change in license fees impact the number of licenses demanded? And this is important. Now we have that context of where is Wisconsin in the greater scheme of the United States? What is the current situation with license fees and the trends of license fees in Wisconsin? It's on a downward trend the last 10 years. So we're at this position. The DNR is underfunded. We need to raise money. We have a 10-year plus downward trend in license fees, meaning a 10-year downward trend in the number of people fishing. And we're tasked with potentially raising license fees. So economically, from a theory perspective, what's going to happen? So we kind of have to evaluate, what is a license fee? Is it elastic? Is it perfectly elastic? Which would mean that for any penny worth of price change, demand could change at an infinite amount. That'd be perfectly elastic. Rarely anything is perfectly elastic. Or on the other side of the spectrum, perfectly inelastic, meaning for any price change, there is no change in quantity demanded. You could raise license fees to $1 million and people would still buy the same amount. Very rare that certain things are inelastic, like air and water, maybe. So most goods are blended. There's a blend of, at certain price points, they display a certain more elasticity. At certain price points, they might display less elasticity. Certain events like COVID make something like a license fee a little bit more inelastic. People don't care. They have nothing else to do. They'll just buy it. So when you look at a couple factors, what makes license fees inelastic? A good example that there's some inelasticity in license fees is the trend of the last 10 or 20 years. License fees have actually gotten cheaper when you factor in the purchasing power and inflation, and there's been decreasing demand. So those combination of those two things display some inelastic nature, meaning if it were perfectly like this, we could raise license fees to $500, fund the DNR, and we'd still have as many anglers. I don't think that's the case. License fees obviously are very elastic as well, and some of the things that create elasticity, substitutes, and market saturation. So the market saturation here is that we've tapped out the number of anglers. I'm not saying we've done that, but anglers have other things. They can golf, they can, go to birthday parties. They have jobs, they have hobbies that are not fishing. They have substitutes. They have other places to fish, right? They can go to Canada. They can go spend money in Minnesota. They can go to Michigan. They can stop musky fishing and only fish in Florida. So those are reasons. It's a little bit of both. And why that's important is because when this happens in certain economics, what we've basically identified is that we don't know. License fees are inelastic and inelastic. We're pretty certain that they're not perfectly inelastic, which means that by nature of that, any price change is going to have an impact on demand and decrease it. So we don't know how much, but an increase in the license will bring down the quantity of licenses. But when all this is the case and it kind of seems like mired and confusing, it's usually, at least in business, it's pretty clear that non-price factors like focusing on license fees is the wrong thing to focus on because it's there's more going on. Like the fact that licenses have gotten cheaper and there's been decreasing demand. Mm-hmm. Changing the price of license fees isn't going to potentially fix any of this.
No, there's underlying issues at play.
And it doesn't identify what those issues are, but it exposes like, whoa. We got to look at this differently because this is not the way out.
Yep.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing that, changing, if you could promise me that next year you could change license fees across the board by 50%, would we have more revenue for the DNR in that year than this year? I'd probably say yes. But the real question is what happens. Look at that trend line that we're on. Let's go back. Look at, what happens with that line?
Yeah.
What happens with 2024, 2025, 2026? Are we getting into less than 1 million anglers? It's definitely not going to increase that. Mm-hmm. So what's at stake with all this? Why is this why all this? And I think it's pretty clear fisheries are the thing that's at stake. Our freedom to enjoy them is at stake. But I think we also are very hesitant. Fisheries management in Wisconsin and throughout the country has been a lot of stories where these three things, or especially this first thing, has popped up where we have a lot of fervor and excitement and we want to take action. But the law of unintended consequences seems to rear its head over and over again because that action is taken without understanding the full picture. A great example of this is basically the entire Great Lakes. You have the rush, the industrialization, wanting to get shipping containers and ships to be able to come in the St. Lawrence and go all the way up to Lake Superior, and we did it. We built. We got through Niagara Falls with shipping containers, and it was supposed to be incredible for business and the economy and everything. And it also brought along sea lampreys, which played a role in absolutely destroying the Great Lakes from a wildlife standpoint, fishery standpoint. Oops, that's a big one. Death spiral is another concept. This is, I think, more specifically what worries me about the Wisconsin. I think the example is left blank because I think Wisconsin is going to become the example of this if we don't do anything. This death spiral where, if I'm a business in a business term and I'm losing customers, I'm losing revenue. My revenue is shrinking. What will make things worse is to start cutting costs and raising prices, which is exactly what we're proposing the DNR do, which is going to result in less customers, and it's going to expedite the decline. Mm-hmm. Doing nothing would actually be better. Not raising prices and doing nothing would be better than cutting costs and raising prices because it'll exhibit just more of that spiral to nothing. So, whoa, we got to watch out for that. I think that's why I'm trying to raise a little bit of an alarm on some of this. I'm all for let's raise license fee. Like the intent is really good. Law of unintended consequences suggest that it will not get us to where we want.
No.
And then related to that is this concept of solutionism. I was joking with Josh because I solutionism Josh and Gabe the other day. And this is basically just, recommending a solution when you have no idea what you're talking about.
What else is new?
Yeah. Like this is pretty, there's a lot of complex things at stake. And I think this has been one of the biggest learnings in fisheries management when you study the history of it. Like early on, we were just like, we could just stock it and manipulate it the way we wanted. It was like clay that we could shape. And then we realized this thing started to blow up in our face, like sea lampreys.
Yep.
Whoa, this is way more complex than we had imagined. The interrelationships between these species, microorganisms, water, temperature, quality, you name it. So we got to be careful because we can make things worse. We can very quickly make things worse.
Yes. Yep.
That's why I mean, like, there is an argument for like, whoa, do nothing. That'll be better than the DNR doing something. Yep. Because it might, but I think it's more of a hesitation. A couple examples of this. The real example was, I think, digging in some of the technological fixes that were proposed to cleaning up Lake Erie. You're just like, oops, you should have maybe understood the full problem. And then obviously that comes clear in hindsight, so we're not blaming anybody. But yeah, we got to be careful with this. Yeah. This is the point. Musky fishing is one big law of unintended consequences. You think you're going to have fun and enjoy your life, and then it's not the case usually. Jokes aside. Okay, so let's bring this back. Let's land the plane, as Jen says. Do we need to raise license fees or get more anglers? It kind of boils down to that, right? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe not. I think this is where, and maybe where our conversation goes next, but let's just look at the facts that we've learned. Less anglers are participating in fishing in Wisconsin, which is not the trend for the rest of the country. Fact. The Wisconsin DNR relies on license fees to fund our fish and wildlife account. License fees have not changed in over a decade. Fact. Well, partial fact. There's been a small increase to trout stamps, salmon stamps, and one other by, I think, 50 cents or a quarter each. So when I say license fees have not changed in over a decade, I mean non-resident and resident, specifically resident annual licenses have not changed in over a decade. Fact. Our politicians matter. They have the power to change this. Raise license fees, pick a new model, fund it a different way, regulations. This is who calls the shots. This is who we vote into office to do this. We talked about license fees previously, and this is not a political statement, but we need facts out here. In 2017, we had an entirely unanimous government. Republican governor, Republican senator, Republican assembly. Usually that means gets done, because there's nothing getting in the way. They tried to push a license fee increase through that was pretty big, and it absolutely failed. They got a 50-cent increase in trout stamps, I believe, like a 50-cent increase in salmon. We'll publish that to make sure it's accurate, but nothing, because they didn't want to touch it. They were worried. And even back then, in 2017, they were worried about the shortfalls in funding of the DNR, and they were seeing the 2-year trend. At that point, it was only a 2-year trend of decreasing license fees. Mm-hmm. So this isn't totally a new problem. But anyway, our politicians matter. They have the power to change this. Fact, raising license fees in the short term could provide a similar boom to fishing license sales as COVID did. It will be short-lived. And long term, we need to address the root cause, get more anglers fishing in Wisconsin. So how could we do that? These are areas I think we want to dig into eventually. But it's pretty obvious. There's an example here of how do we do that. Make Wisconsin the best fishing state in the country. Invest in our fisheries. We have the 4th largest amount of fresh water, the 6th largest amount of angling population. People recognize the state as fishing. Make it the best. There's examples of this. Montana Wild Trout Project is a great one that we will revisit on a further episode, what they did to turn things around. And then we get to the question of how do we fund the DNR? So it's this, do we need to raise license fees or get more anglers? We need to get more anglers, and a way to do that is to make Wisconsin the best fishing place in the world. We need to raise more money for the DNR. I'm proposing that there's not a license fee model that will help us with that, and we need to explore other models. So this is an area I think you and I want to dig into We're going to publish, there's a report that we kind of put together on all the different types of license models and the pros and cons. The one I really want to call out is this conservation tax. Missouri is probably one of them that has a tax on their, as within their sales tax. So effectively a portion of the sales tax directly funds the entire conservation fish and wildlife account. That's kind of crazy. They're extremely well funded. The thing that Missouri doesn't have is they are not the fourth largest in fresh water. They do not have the fisheries we have. But what they do have is every single citizen, every single non-resident that comes into Missouri and spends money on sales tax is paying for the fish and wildlife. That's impressive. Every kayaker, every boater, every single person is brought into this in a way that we are not in Wisconsin. It's anglers and hunters. So that's kind of interesting. And I think where some of this ties out for me, we're not going to dig into this, but just to publish it, you guys can screenshot this. Again, we're going to send this presentation out. These are some of the areas we want to go next. We've identified some of them within here. You know, we can deep dive into a little bit more of the demographics of the angling population in the U.S. You know, are we getting more or less women involved? More, you know, rural versus urban. Deep dive into lots of other funding sources. I'll let you read all of this, but this is where we want you guys to participate. Send us ideas, send us comments. If you think there's people that'd be interesting to interview on these topics, we would love to interview them. We'd love to learn more from them. This is going to be a process, and you guys are along with us for it. So I think that's it for our PowerPoint today, fella. Shall we scurry back to our regularly scheduled programming? What do you think?
Yeah, that was excellent, Daniel. Great presentation on all the information.
Thank you. My public speaking class in 8th grade did serve a purpose. Yeah, I mean, I think I've said everything I need to say on that. You guys are probably sick of hearing me talk at this point. But I think really before we wrap, we do have a little nugget. Josh has got a little nugget of wisdom he may be sharing at the end. But before we wrap, I think just thanks for joining us on this. This is kind of part 2 in understanding the problem, you know, the current situation in fish and wildlife. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you found it informative. We're going to open source all the stuff we found so far, all the research as we go, as we learn more. Please check out. It's all going to be linked in the show notes, all in the episode notes, episode description. There's a lot. Share it with your family and friends. Share it with people you know that are smarter than us. If you have comments, feedback, experts, something where we were completely wrong, support, we want to hear it all. I think this is that's the only way this is going to work, folks, if we all band together. So please make it better. Please share your feedback. We appreciate you listening. And now we're going to end with a little quick. That was terrible. We're going to cut that. Or Josh is going to leave it in there to blackmail me. So I'll just keep going because I know how he rolls. But we are going to end with a quick tip. That was my terrible try at being catchy. I think I've run out of brain power at this point, so I'm going to kick it over to Bam Bam for a little quick tip.
Did you black out there for a second? You're just coming back to reality.
That last 30 seconds was just...
You did well, Daniel.
Thanks.
You did very good.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Yeah, thanks for sticking with us. If you're still along for the ride after that big heavy journey, we do have a quick tip for you. So today's quick tip is unfortunately not brought to you by Quick Trip, but someday, hopefully, it will be. So our tip for the day is don't get stuck in the past. A lot of folks, they like to think about all the fish that they caught in this certain spot several years ago. But with this very unseasonably warm fall, it's very easy to think about years past with totally different weather and water conditions. So don't get stuck in the past. Trust the process. Fish the conditions as they're supposed to be fished, and don't get astray from that.
Is this a preview for our Treelands episode?
I think it's a preview.
Damn it! That just gave me
I know
horror memories of. Josh and I figured this quick tip out at the tournament. Everyone, it was so much fun.
Yeah. Yep. A lot of lakes right now that historically, have experienced turnover. They are not turning over. So
not yet. Nope. Not even really close. Down here, we're not even below 60s yet. We're still hanging out in the mid 60s.
Yes. Fish in the present.
Who knows? It's warm. It's nice. We'll be fishing hopefully for a while this year yet.
Yeah. Till New Year's Eve.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that tip. And yes, that is a preview to our next episode. We're going to be discussing a much more lighthearted topic, but equally fun and important. We got really a fall recap. What have we done in September? We had the school fishing, Treelands, Beast to East. We did not go to Beast to East, but we had some fun updates from that tournament.
Yep. Had some friends out there. It's always fun to hear the results of both tournaments at the end of it all, too. And we're going to recap our predictions because on a previous episode, we made predictions of what the outcome would be. So we're going to kind of reference those and when we talk about the results of the tournaments. So stay tuned. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for listening. We love you guys. Peace out.
See ya. Spot Burn Podcast, episode 31. Thank you for listening to the Spot Burn Podcast. Coming to you from the dungeon, this podcast is presented by Musky Fool Fly Fishing Co. We want to thank our awesome sponsors, Cortland Line Company and Stealth Craft Boats. We also want to thank all of you, our listeners, for tuning in, subscribing, sharing, and spreading the good word. If you haven't heard, go check us out at muskyfool.com. Have fun out there on the water, y'all.